Chapter 31. With a steady breath and a calm mind, Sakura breathed in slowly as she sat on her bed cross-legged after waking up. It was part of her morning practice that she had been taught by Kurenai. Her eyes were closed, her focus centered within the blank canvas of her imagination as she slowly began the process of molding yin chakra within her body. The art of illusion was one that was subtle, whether it was using one's creativity to dictate the perceptions of reality for a foe through internal techniques or weaving into the world that which dwelled within the mind. Sakura chose to practice her external technique for this morning's exercise, using her chakra as the paint and her room as the canvas. The yin chakra seeped out of her tenketsu and coated the room, becoming a film that covered the walls and forming a territory where the effect could take hold. Connected to her mind through the chakra, vivid imagery took shape before she locked it into place. Opening her eyes, Sakura found herself sitting within a forest as the sun rose over the treetops with the demonic illusion, false surroundings technique. Though it seemed perfect, careful inspection revealed there was a flaw in the illusion with the leaves and bark holding the same patterns. It was a mistake that could cost someone their life if seen through on the battlefield. That was unacceptable. Had she been overambitious to the extent that her mind overlooked something so simple? Or was she distracted by something else? Footfalls caught her ears before she could figure it out. Sakura dismissed the illusion and her room came into view again as there was a knock on her door. Yes? Breakfast is ready, her mother, Mibuki Haruno, said through the door. Sakura got dressed and went to the dining room. There she noticed her father's absence. I thought Dad was due back last night? Her mother shook her head. No, it would seem that his mission has been extended due to some complications near the border to the land of sound. But he sent a message saying that he'll be fine and sends his love. She supposed it couldn't be helped as she sat at the table. While her mother had retired from being a kunoichi, her father was an active shinobi. Despite not being rank higher than her, he was a senior shinobi with years of experience under his belt compared to her few months. Are you visiting the hospital again? Her mother asked, making small talk. Kakashi-sensei should be getting ready to be released, and I wanted to see him and leave before I went to see if there were any D-rank missions available for me to take alone, since our team is dissolved for the time being. I should work on raising the number of missions under my record while I can. While she could try asking Sasuke if he wasn't doing anything at the moment, after yesterday she doubted that he would accompany her on something like that. Kurenai-sensei would also be recovering at the moment and not liable to teach her anything new, plus she had her own students to train. And Naruto was undergoing private training now that he was a Chunin. We should go shopping together sometime, just us girls, her mother said, looking at her clothes. I think you could use a change of clothes since you're growing now. Or maybe something to suit your shorter hair. It couldn't hurt. If anything, Sakura imagined that her mother felt lonely with her father gone. And it had been a while since they'd done anything together. Sure. Of course, we still need to find another shop that sells our usual style of clothes as well. She held her hand to her chin. Jen had been such a wonderful tailor. It's a shame she didn't make it. Sakura stopped eating when she heard the name of the older woman. It brought up a feeling of guilt in the pit of her stomach. Her mother took notice. Is something wrong? Sakura shook her head and then forced down the rest of her food before heading out towards the hospital after a quick stop to Ino's family flower shop to pick some up for her teachers. Since Kurenai's room was closer, Sakura decided to visit her first. Hinata, Kiba, and Shino were there already when she knocked on the door. Sorry if I'm intruding, Sakura told her as entered the room when Hinata opened the door. Not at all, Kurenai said, sitting up while her other students sat before her. You're as welcomed as my other students. I just wish that it was in a more pleasant setting than a hospital room. I bought a get-well bouquet, but I should have expected you'd have received some already. To be exact, there were 2 other bouquets already on the stand next to her bed, one of which was roses. I'm rather fortunate to have so many people care enough to bring me flowers, Kurenai said, accepting them tenderly. Have you been keeping up your training since last we met? Yes, ma'am, Sakura said. Good. You have a lot of potential in that field. With the use of a few supplementary techniques, I feel that you'll almost certainly make Chunin during the next exams. Kiba chuckled a bit. Well, if Naruto could make Chunin, it should be a cinch for the rest of us next time around. That comment earned him a few stern looks, but it was Hinata that spoke up. He worked hard to earn his rank. You shouldn't say it like it was easy, Kiba-kun. Geez, I was kidding, Kiba said, rubbing the back of his neck at being chastised. Me and Naruto are cool. We even hashed things out over ramen last night to celebrate with the squirts he hangs out with. If you don't believe me, just go ask him a few doors down." Sakura blinked at that. "Naruto's here?" "Yeah, Akamaru caught his and Sasuke's scent when we were on the way in." He tilted his to the right. "They lead to your sensei's room." Sakura pardoned herself and then left out of the room to go see her team. The door to Kakashi's room opened abruptly before she reached it. Sasuke walked out and past her towards the exit without a word. Then Naruto came out of the room. "Sasuke, you can't just," he noticed Sakura. "Oh, Sakura-chan. You're here too?" "I came to visit Kakashi-sensei," she said, turning her head to Sasuke's back as he walked away. "What's wrong with Sasuke?" Naruto frowned. "He came saying he wants Kakashi-sensei to teach him how to use his Sharingan better and then left out when he agreed. He didn't even bother saying get well or anything." Hearing that, she was reminded of how he was during the early days of their team formation. "You mean it's like he's going back to how he used to be?" "Just give him time," Kakashi said, standing at the doorway in a hospital shirt and pants. His mask and eye covering were on his face too, as per usual. He fixed his gaze on Sasuke. The encounter hit him rather hard on a personal level, and he's feeling anxious. Once he's had time to settle down, everything will be fine. Sakura wanted to take his word for it, but had her doubts to an extent. "And are you okay, sensei?" "If anything, I'm feeling a bit too restless from all the sleep I've gotten, but once the final examination is done, I'll be free to go." He walked back inside, and they followed him into the room. Taking a seat on the edge of the bed, he looked them over as Sakura set the flowers down on the stand by the bed. "First of all, let me congratulate you on your promotion to Chunin, Naruto," he said, taking in the sight of Naruto's flak jacket. "You've come a long way from how you used to be." "Yeah. I owe a lot of people for that," Naruto said humbly. "Especially you guys. Now I've just got to live up to it, so I've been working hard to improve. I've even learned my elemental affinity and an awesome technique called the Rasengan." Kakashi seemed to perk up at that last one. "You did? What is the Rasengan exactly?" Sakura asked. "It's an A-rank technique created by the 4th Hokage, done through shape manipulation and chakra control," Kakashi said. "If Naruto really has learned it, he would be the 4th person in history to be able to use it." "Watch," Naruto said before conjuring a clone. He then held his hand out as the clone made strange gesturing motions until a spiraling sphere of blue chakra took shape in the palm of the original's hands. "See? Let me compare it," Kakashi said as he held his right hand out and then gripped his wrist with the left hand. A spiraling sphere of his own that matched Naruto's formed. "No doubt about it. That's definitely the Rasengan." Naruto and his clone looked dumbfounded. In stereo, they said, "You can do it too. I did say you were the 4th. I was a student of the 4th Hokage and learned it when I was young, but the technique isn't very suitable for me because I couldn't complete it. Likewise, Jiraiya was the one who originally trained Minato-sensei and was taught it as well, so I assume it was him who taught you it. How long did it take you to learn it?" "Less than a week," he said as the clone disappeared. "I can't get it down without the clone just yet." "It's beyond impressive that you managed to learn to form it that quickly," Kakashi told him. "It took the 4th Hokage around 3 years to create it. I took a few months to be able to craft it on my own, and I could never complete the technique fully." "It looks completed to me," Naruto said, looking pensively at it. "I mean that the technique is in its rawest form," Kakashi said as his technique dissipated. "It lacks a nature transformation. I tried to infuse my own element into it, but it proved too difficult for even me, and I created the Chidori instead, to use in the war. You've come further than I could have imagined in such a short time, so maybe you'll be able to perfect it where we couldn't." Sakura couldn't help but feel somewhat surprised that he managed to learn what was supposed to be an A-rank technique over less than a week. It had to be between when he disappeared and then came back with that woman who helped Sasuke. And Sasuke had learned the Chidori as well over the course of the month they were apart. In comparison, she only learned a few techniques and none of them were as powerful as theirs were. It seemed every time that they disappeared from her view they were getting further ahead of her, or what if she was holding them back in the end and they could only flourish when she wasn't with them? "And you, Sakura, are similarly coming along nicely," Kakashi said, as though reading her mind. "You've gained practical experience in using both yin and yang chakra, not even a full year out of the academy. That's something few others can claim. You have a sharp mind and excellent control, meaning you'll be able to do many things with enough training. Be proud of that." "Thank you," she told him. Then there was a knock on the door. Shizune POV. Shizune tried to repress the feeling welling up in her stomach as she knocked on the door of the last patient her lady had treated for psychological damage, having already cleared one yesterday and another minutes ago. But it was easier said than done. After all, the Hokage's words still weighed heavily on her mind. He wanted her to spearhead a course for medical training, meant to serve as an introduction to those without experience, so that they could perform simple treatments in an emergency situation, such as closing wounds that would either bleed out or hinder movement. Those that had exemplary skill in the practice could be placed later into an accelerated course, enough to gain their certification in a shorter time. While it pleased her to have his trust despite being gone for so long, she had her doubts about if she was qualified to do so when she had only just gotten back. Taunton, the small ninja pig that chose to go with her while their mistress was still at home, wiggled her snout at the door before turning to Shizune. "Buhi. There's someone we've met inside?" She got a nod in response before the door opened, revealing Naruto and the girl she had seen the day that they had gotten back. "Hello, Naruto-kun. Shizune?" His slightly surprised expression turned to one of realization. "Oh, you must be the one who's here to clear Kakashi-sensei to leave the hospital." She nodded as she entered into the room, Taunton following in her footsteps. "It shouldn't take too long. All I'm doing is making sure there are no lasting problems that need to be addressed." That said, both Naruto and the girl accompanying him sat out of the way as she hovered over the patient and began her work diligently. Though she doubted that there would be anything wrong, given that it was Tsunade who had dealt with the psychological damage, it was good practice to follow up afterwards. It also helped with maintaining her lady's anonymity. After 5 minutes of thoroughly examining him, Shizune gave him a clear bill of health. "You're all clear." "That's great," Naruto said with a bright smile. "Thanks, Shizune." Shizune shook her head. In the end, she was just checking on the flawless work done by her lady. There was nothing to thank her for. She excused herself while Naruto began to talk to his sensei about something else, making her way down the hallway when the girl who was with Naruto came running after her. "Is there something wrong?" Shizune asked. "I'm sorry if I'm imposing on you, but I was wondering if there was another patient you could look at if you have the time," she asked. "He was injured some time ago and told that he might not be able to remain a shinobi, but I'm hoping that there might something the medics have missed that you might be able to catch." "I suppose I can take a look," Shizune said cautiously. It wasn't as though she couldn't take a few minutes to do so. "But if the other medics have given their assessment, I doubt I'll find something amiss." The pink-haired girl that introduced herself as Naruto's teammate, Sakura Haruno, led Shizune to the room of a young man with bowl-cut hair and thick eyebrows, where she ran a diagnostic on him and found the reason why they have given their assessment. "I'm sorry, but you have bone fragments lodged in your spine. They're not harmful to your daily living if you don't undergo strenuous activity, but it is certainly the type of injury that will leave you unable to continue as a shinobi." "So it's hopeless?" the young man asked in his wheelchair. "It would require a high-risk surgery to remove them. At best, I would give you less than a 50% chance of recovering if the surgeon is skilled enough. And, taking an estimated guess, even someone with Tsunade's level of skill would raise the odds to a borderline 50% rate." Yet, despite such low odds, a flash of hope appeared on the boy's face. "You mean there's a chance that I could continue if I undergo the surgery?" "Technically, yes," she said. "But, as I've said, the odds are rather low even in the hands of the most skilled surgeon. It would be an extensive surgery and require a long period of rehabilitation, not even taking into account your recent injuries. And that's only if it's successful. If it fails, you'll die, there's no middle ground in between." His eyes looked dejected for a moment, horrified even. That was natural, given that it was his life that was being wagered on what amounted to an elective surgery. There was no one who would blame him for retiring due to the nature of the injury, and he was young enough that he would be able to find a new career without trouble. Then his expression hardened. Remaining seated, he bowed his head towards her. "Miss, if you can find a surgeon capable, I want to undergo the surgery as soon as possible." Shizune was briefly surprised by the statement and finality in the tone of his words. There was no hesitation, despite what she said. "Are you sure that's what you want? If you die, then that's it. You'll be leaving behind everyone you know and care about." "I understand that." There was a hitch in his voice as he forced the words out. "I am terrified of the thought of dying. The thought of leaving behind my sensei, my team, my friends, and my family terrifies me. However, even more than that, I am terrified of the notion of turning down an opportunity such as this when I'd given up all hope until now." His voice wavered for a pause after admitting his weakness and hesitance and fear. "I had always dreamed of becoming a splendid shinobi to protect the village, despite everything I went through. Yet, when the attack happened, there was little I could do despite knowing that there were enemies attacking the people I cared about and vowed to protect. I was forced to accept that because I believed that there was nothing that could be done. I cannot express how painful that feeling was." Shizune's heart grew heavier as she listened to his earnest words. The sentiment was shared by Sakura, who held her hands close to her chest, and even Taunton, whose ears lowered as she stared at the teardrops that had pooled at the base of his feet. "If I were to turn down this opportunity because I was afraid of dying, then it would be even worse than death itself," he said, falling out of the wheelchair and to his knees, placing his head on the ground in a pose of supplication. "I would be dishonoring all those who chose to fight to their last breath, to my sensei that put his very soul into training me, and to myself for letting my fear control me. I would rather die doing all I can to protect them to the bitter end rather than sit out and live with the knowledge that I didn't do everything I could to once more fight for the people I care about. I don't want to have such regrets, so please. Even if you say that, there's still the matter of finding a surgeon who would consent to the operation," Shizune said as she crouched down and laid a hand on his shoulder. "I'll consult with someone I believe to be capable, but I have to warn you that there's a chance they'll also decline." "That is all I can ask," the boy said, looking up. He was truly desperate. Not just for himself, but for the sake of others. "If there is even a slight chance of success, I will take it without regret." Looking into the pleading pair of eyes, Shizune couldn't help but wonder if she had made things worse by offering him hope when there was possibly none to be found in the end. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32. Jiraiya found himself frowning as he read the scroll in his grasp, a messenger toad waiting patiently at the foot of the boulder that he was sitting atop of. He was frowning even before he got the scroll, having been told by the old man he would be leaving for the hidden sand soon enough as his representative. The matter of their reparations and returning their captured shinobi had yet to be settled after all, and the old man was trying to put him in more political situations than he was comfortable with for when he was given the hat. However, this scroll was one of many sent from his various spies in the neighboring nations around the Land of Sound. After Orochimaru was finally slain and the majority of his forces utilized during the invasion executed, it had been something of a chaotic situation. The various clans and shinobi that had been under his thumb were no longer oppressed, and that meant they'd started fighting. The clans would wage wars, with losers being eliminated or assimilated beneath a single banner that consolidated power. The strays would turn to banditry to survive and eventually necessitate the use of shinobi to put them down. Tragedy would leave many miserable, something that he'd seen too many times to count. The Leaf was largely staying out of the matter because the Land of Wind was on the verge of the same thing, with their primary hidden village being significantly understaffed. The new Wind daimyo had a vested interest in preventing that if he didn't want to end up like the old one. Yet, the scroll he had in his hands now outlined that the chaos in the Land of Sound was settling at an unnaturally fast pace. Jiraiya had been involved in a wide variety of conflicts, from wars between major villages to genocides between clans. So he knew the fallout from the invasion should have left them in disarray for a few more months as they vied to fill in the gap left by the disappearance of the hidden village. It was an ugly thing, but something that was repeated enough throughout history that it was nearly an absolute. Yet someone was suppressing the fighting, and Jiraiya had a sinking feeling that Orochimaru was involved. They had combed the base locations they got from Karen's mind and found them devoid of anything meaningful, hastily abandoned or destroyed to cover their tracks. He may have been dead, but Jiraiya couldn't shake the feeling that his right-hand man was still operating under his thumb and carrying out his plans. He penned a response on a smaller scroll that he pulled out his pouch. Then he handed it back to the messenger toad, which took it and then departed. That done, his thoughts turned to the more pressing matter of Naruto. If he had to depart soon, it may be more prudent to arrange for him to take a mission to gain more experience in working outside of his immediate peers. He'd have to see the old man about a mission that wasn't too difficult, something else to get his feet wet as a Chunin. A few minutes later, Naruto showed up on time for his training and raised an interesting question. "Old sage, show me how to complete the Rasengan." He arched his brows in slight confusion. "You've got the basics down when you use a clone." Naruto clarified his request. "I mean adding an element into it, the nature transformation." Kakashi-sensei could do it, but mentioned that he couldn't add in his own lightning element, but since I've got wind and can use yang chakra, maybe one of them will work. Ah, I suppose I shouldn't be surprised he knows it. It made sense that Minato's surviving student knew it. But you should probably focus on getting the technique down perfectly and your own element before trying that. Actually, now that he thought about it, maybe he should just tell Naruto about his father. He already knew about his mother, and he had come a long way from his early days. He could keep the secret, and the boy did have a right to know. Naruto, do you want to know about your father now, while we've got the time? The boy's expression became conflicted, a contrast to what Jiraiya expected. He actually took a long moment to think about it before he spoke. Can it wait until Karen is with us to listen? She was with me when I learned about my mother and we're. He was struggling to find the right word. It made sense given that one minute she was a member of his clan, the next she confessed she was in love with him. Kid didn't know how lucky he was on that front. Fair enough, Jiraiya decided. Though I don't think you'll have to wait long. According to the old man, that woman from the ceiling R&D building is trying to get you and her to come visit so she can get some answers about those other masks soon. We can talk about it then, but for now let's talk about what you can do with Yang Chakra since you can mold it too and get some practice in. Anko house. Karen groaned softly as she sat down at the desk in her room. Her muscles were throbbing with agony, pulsing with pain. Anko's idea of a workout was exhausting, though it possibly explained her figure, and she wouldn't even let her use chakra because she wanted her to save it for when she had to do exercises related to that. Regardless, Karen did her best to ignore the pain while going through the studying materials for the mandatory knowledge of the village. She had finished the section on the first Hokage and the founding of the village. There was a comprehensive look at the many clans involved in its formation, including the minor ones that had been assimilated or have gone extinct like the Uzumaki. Now she was on the second Hokage, who was responsible for creating many of the village's institutions and the support system that allowed it to function as well as it did. He was a creative and talented man for certain, being the creator of several techniques like the shadow clone, though there was no public mention of the variation Naruto knew, and possessed a unique sword of some kind that could forge a blade out of lightning that he combined with his water techniques to lay waste to his enemies. It was the attack on him by the Gold and Silver brothers of the Hidden Cloud that was thought to be the catalyst for the First Great Shinobi War, which eventually killed him and left the current Hokage in charge for decades now. Despite all of that, Karen didn't have too much interest in the past outside of her clan. Even then, the information in the book she had here was less than that which she picked up from her independent research during the Chunin exams. If not for the need to do perfect on the test, she wouldn't bother going through with it. Time ticked away with her studies until there was a knock on her door. She looked at the clock to see that it was lunchtime. She closed the book and then left the bedroom for the dining room, where she found they were having takeout again. She ate it in silence and then thanked her for the meal. Anko, sitting at the table with her food, not even half finished, arched an eyebrow. If you don't like the food, you can say something. I won't give you a mark just because you speak up about it. I never said I didn't like it, Karen said. It was true she didn't find it as appealing as her usual cuisine, but it was tolerable. I can tell by the way you eat. Anko leaned back in her chair. Let me guess, the flavor doesn't suit your palate? Karen supposed that was why she was a specialist in tracking and interrogation and placed in charge of overseeing her. She took notice of these sorts of things. I'm just not used to it. Grass was the last village I was in since I was a spy, Anko finished for her. We've already accepted that. Go on. A soft sigh preceded her continuing on. Since I was a spy, I had to stay low and keep to myself. No telling them about my healing abilities, no telling them about my sensory abilities, just do what I'm told by superiors and don't cause problems. I had to cook for myself since I lived on my own, and the selection of herbs and spices and meats they have for sale there are different than here. When I was visiting Naruto, I usually cooked in that style as well. Okay then, if you're good we'll go on a grocery shopping trip this weekend, she decided. It'll be one of your privileges, and it'd probably be interesting to experience home cooking for once. All I know is survival cooking, and that usually involves catching, killing, skewering, and frying over a fire. Karen stared puzzled by the show of lenience before mentally shrugging it off and going to the bathroom to brush her teeth after the meal. There was still studying to do, and then chakra training after that. Though she still didn't get why she had to practice making chakra threads of all things. 000. You shouldn't have told him about the surgery, Sanada told her apprentice in an exasperated tone as she finished treating the medical file on this Rock Lee child. Shizuna had returned from her trip to the hospital, and they were in what served as the living room of their new abode within the village, with the slug Sanan perched on the sofa and Shizuna sitting upright in a reclining chair. In truth, she hadn't been all that happy to begin with after that day's session. There were only so many times she could stand the memory of her lover's death being brought up to the surface as the root of her trauma before she lost her patience. More so considering that she wasn't allowed to drink right now, meaning that she couldn't numb herself to the pain. Then Jiraiya came in to check on her, and it took all her restraint not to throw him out of the window. So no, she wasn't in a good mood when Shizuna had come to her asking for her opinion on a medical procedure. Had it been anyone else, she wouldn't have bothered to even look at medical files or charts. But Shizuna was the one person above all the rest in the village, next to the old man, who deserved her ear when she asked her for an assessment. She had been with Sanada the entire time she was gone from the village and asked for little to nothing in exchange, so she got a pass. So, it's not possible to treat him after all? Shizuna asked as she continued to gently pet the sleeping ninja pig in her lap. It's not impossible, but there's a reason the doctors waved telling him about the procedure. No one wants to have blood on their hands or record from this type of thing. Even if I was far enough into my own therapy to not be bothered by the sight of blood, I can't say whether or not I'd be comfortable handling the procedure. It'd be one thing if it was essential to save his life, but this was deemed an elective surgery, one with a morbidly high fatality rate, even in the hands of a skilled surgeon. The surgeon in question will be laying their reputation on the line for no reason, risking their records as well. That could hamper their ability to be allowed to perform surgeries that someone else might need it. I see. Her dark eyes closed in defeat, and she sighed softly, her breath tinged with regret. Then I'll have to inform him that I was unable to find anyone capable. He and his friend will be crushed. It's a shame, but it can't be helped. Sanada frowned slightly as she pointed out the obvious. Or you could do it yourself. Next to me, you're the most capable person to handle it. The fact that you could calculate the odds of success means you understand the risks and steps necessary for the extraction. If it's you, then the odds will be the best they could possibly be for the boy given the circumstances. Shizuna's reaction wasn't that of surprise at the suggestion, merely reluctance and hesitation. She must have considered the option, but refused to speak of it before now. That hesitation was concerning, given that a medic had to be decisive in their actions. Sanada closed the file and set it down on the wooden table between them. Shizuna, do you want to help this boy? Of course, she said almost immediately, in contrast to before. That was something she was firm on. She wanted to help him. And why is it that you want to help this boy, despite knowing of the nature of his injury and having no personal ties to him? I listened to what they told me about him and his struggles and how desperate he was to regain the chance to pursue his dream to help his village, she explained. Hearing that, and how he mentioned that he had hope for the first time in a long time, how could I not want to help him? Then why are you still hesitating? That was the key question here. You want to help him, so you have the motivation. And you have the knowledge needed to perform the procedure, so you're capable of doing so. Knowing that, what's stopping you from just doing it? Are you afraid that you'll end up like me if you fail? Shizuna vehemently shook her head at that. That's not it. There's no one as great as you are in the medical arts. Even after all these years, there's no doubt in my mind about that. Then is it that you won't be able to meet the standard that you feel I've set? That garnered a reaction. It clicked. Shizuna had placed Sanada on a pedestal for what it meant to be a medic nin, even after seeing her at her worst. That spoke greatly of her faith and devotion, but it also spoke of the problem of doing so. When you look up at someone on a pedestal for too long, it looks too high to climb for you. Shizuna, he's willing to wager his life on this because you gave him hope. He's accepting responsibility for his own decision regardless of how things go. That's how precious his dream is, and he's willing to die to achieve it. The rest is on your shoulders now. You have 3 options from my perspective, and each one of them has you being responsible in one way or another. Shizuna straightened her back to listen. The first is that you can tell him that you simply can't do it and bear the weight of responsibility for crushing his dreams after giving him hope in exchange for him living as he is, Sanada said. Don't lie to him about not being able to find someone else because that's deflecting it and unbefitting for a medic nin. Accept responsibility since you gave him that hope, learn from it, and move on. The second is that you can try to find another surgeon to handle it. But no one will likely do that, Shizuna said. It'll be near impossible, but there's still a chance, and it may take time, months or even years, and you'll be relying on the surgeon's skill rather than your own. Whether it succeeds or fails, they did make the decision and bear the majority of the responsibility. Not that you won't be accountable to some extent since they acted on your advice or counsel. Don't tell yourself otherwise. Shizuna nodded in understanding before speaking the last option herself. And the last is that I do it myself? You take all the responsibility for what happens on the table as the surgeon. It's your skill, knowledge, and motivation that you're relying on. If you succeed, he'll be able to follow his dreams and it's because of you. If he dies, then you have to accept that it happened and know that you did your very best. Of course, in a worst-case scenario, she may end up like Tsunade herself. Haunted from her failure to save someone she desperately wanted to, despite everything. But Tsunade felt that Shizuna, having seen her languish in that state for years, would be strong enough to come back from it. That in mind, Tsunade continued on in a soft tone. That is the burden of being a responsible medic, Nin, that I've taught you. Every decision you make for a life is weighed against your knowledge, skill, and circumstances. There will be instances where you'll try your hardest and fail, but you have to accept that you did your best. Knowing all of that, which option would you take? Shizuna brought her slender hand to her chin in deep thought, as though contemplating it. After a moment, she lowered her hand and spoke. Do you really think I can do it myself? Of course I do. If I didn't think you were capable, I would say as much. That was a necessity for a medic. They had to be honest about their own ability and be willing to take the weight of a life into their hands. Given enough time and practice, I'm sure you'll surpass me thoroughly. That was the role of an apprentice after all. That was why the old man trusted her with that program. And the bulk of the reason Tsunade agreed to come back here and go through all of this. Dan's niece, her apprentice, couldn't reach her full potential if Tsunade was weighing her down instead of propping her up. So she needed to pull herself together. That way she could guide Shizuna even further. At least until the apprentice finally surpassed the master in the end. End of chapter 32.